Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC Fight Night 45, Cerrone versus Miller. This is taking place next week on a Wednesday. No UFC event this upcoming weekend, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm getting very sick of all of these UFC Fight Night cards. And moreover, in general, just the whole international expansion of the UFC and them putting on all of these cards with a lot of filler fights. It's just getting too hard to keep up with everything. Not enough time to process all the fights, and just very time consuming to watch a full UFC event every weekend. But to compensate for not having a card this weekend, I guess they're running two cards next week. This one's on a Wednesday, and then the following Saturday is the Fight Night Dublin card. McGregor versus Brandao. Also have predictions for that fight, for that event. And Cerrone versus Miller. Let's get right into it. My general thoughts on the overall card. Pretty mediocre. A few interesting matchups here. Very few. Nothing really meaningful other than the main event. A pretty poor card. Like a lot of these Fight Night cards. I'm really looking forward to the Fox card at the end of the month. That is like a really prime UFC card with a lot of high-level talent on there. I think that'll be the best free Fight Night card we've gotten all year. But let's get into this card and give you my predictions. So there are going to be a couple fights here to start off the card that I'm going to have to skip. On the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card, the first women's strawweight fight, which should be interesting. Claudia Gadelha versus Tina Latamaki. Obviously, I don't know anything about either of them. Two newcomers and a whole new weight division. First fight ever, women's strawweight. That's 115, so I can't make a pick there. And then on the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at lightweight, Denis Cedeno taking on Jared Sanders. Another fight that I am going to skip. Sanders being a newcomer, and Cedeno coming off of his debut loss to Ernest Chavez. And that was a pretty forgettable fight. Don't remember too much about it. Just remember not being impressed with Cedeno, and Chavez not really looking that great either, so I don't know much at all about either of them, so can't make a pick there either. But this next fight is a really good matchup. Bantamweight Hugo the Wolverine Viana taking on Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling coming off of his debut win over Cody Gibson. And I was really impressed with him. He comes out of the Serra Longo camp, same camp that Weidman comes out of, and recent tough winner Eddie Gordon. But he looked really good against Cody Gibson. I remember his striking looking really good, and he seemed like a very good athlete, very strong wrestler with really good grappling. He really dominated Cody Gibson that fight, and I was very impressed with his whole skill set, and seemed like a very high-level athlete. Hugo Viana, on the other hand, veteran of Tough Brazil 1. He lost to the eventual winner, Honey Jason, in the house in the semifinals match. And he didn't get beaten badly. That was also a very uneventful fight. Nothing really happened, but since coming in the UFC, He had one really impressive knockout win over Ruben Duran. He got knocked out by T.J. Dillashaw pretty quickly, which obviously, Dillashaw is the champ. That loss doesn't. That's not anything to knock him for. And then he had a win over Junior Hernandez, where he was really strong in the first couple rounds and faded and let Hernandez get back into the fight as the fight went on. Hugo Viana, really aggressive striker, likes to blitz guys, comes forward, pushes guys back, puts them on their heels, has really lethal flurries where he throws his hands. And we haven't seen much of his ground game or his wrestling game. Aljamain Sterling, like I said, seemed like a really strong grappler and wrestler. And from what I remember, I think he showed pretty good striking in the Cody Gibson fight. I think that wrestling's going to get it done for Sterling. Should be an interesting fight, though. I think I'll give Viana the speed and power advantage on the feet. With Sterling, I think will just be the better athlete, and I think he'll have a more well-rounded game with the wrestling. So I'm going to take Aljamain Sterling by decision. Next up, a women's bantamweight fight: Jessamyn Duke versus Leslie Smith. Jessamyn Duke, veteran of Tough 18. She dropped a decision to Raquel Pennington in the house. And then in the finale, she had a nice decision win over Peggy Morgan, where she didn't look great, but she looked decent. Got some combinations in. She went for a schoolyard headlock, though, which to me seemed like a big mental error, and ended up getting her back taken late in the fight, but was able to get out of it. And Jessamyn Duke in her last fight dropped a decision to Betch Correia, where I thought she looked very hesitant, showed no sense of urgency, just really wasn't willing to engage and throw enough strikes in that fight. But she's a Muay Thai style fighter. Showed decent striking against Raquel Pennington. We haven't seen her ground game yet from Tough or in the UFC. And Leslie Smith, coming off of her debut loss to Sarah Kaufman. I don't remember that fight being that competitive. I think Kaufman pretty much controlled that whole fight with the striking and in the clinch. But Kaufman is a female fighter I really respect. I think she is one of the more elite fighters in the women's bantamweight division. Leslie Smith has a longer resume. I think she has more professional experience than Jessamyn Duke. Duke only has a handful of fights professionally. Only has 5 fights. I think Duke might be able to, get back on the horse here. Get a win. I don't know how much Smith's experience is going to help her. The last fight against Kaufman was the first fight of hers I've ever seen. I don't know anything about her outside of the UFC and that first fight she had. Kind of a tough fight for me to pick. I'll go with Jessamyn Duke. I think I think she'll pick up the pace in this fight, realize that she's had a couple of lackluster performances, and I think she appears to be the more talented striker, but really I don't know enough about Leslie Smith, and Jessamyn Duke hasn't looked great in her last couple of fights, but I'll go with Duke by decision. And next up, last fight on the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card of lightweight, Gleison Tibau taking on Pat Bam Bam Healy. Pat Healy, I thought he was set to really move up the ladder at lightweight and become a top contender after that great submission win he had over Jim Miller. He looked really strong in that fight, but that was his last win in the UFC, and since then has been on a pretty bad losing streak. Pretty much being dominated in all of his fights against very good guys, but none of those fights were the least bit competitive. Got beat up pretty bad by by Habib Nurmagomedov, and obviously he's become one of the top prospects. Bobby Green outboxed him. Healy could never get his wrestling game working in that fight. At the end of the fight, he got Green on his back and started to pound away with only a few seconds left, but the rest of the fight, he was outstruck pretty badly. And then against Jorge Masvidal, same thing. Wasn't able to get anything going, just outstruck. Tibau, I think he might have, I think Healy might have, this is a better matchup for him. Tibau is he's not an active fighter. He fights at a pretty slow pace. He throws a very low volume of strikes. He pretty much looks for that one big strike to hurt a guy, and if he can land that big strike, he'll jump on a submission. He's been in the UFC forever, has a lot of experience. Dropped his last fight to Michael Johnson, where he got knocked out. Before that, had a couple of wins over Jamie Varner, a finish over John Cholish, but a pretty inconsistent fighter. He can't ever seem to really put together a real win streak. He has a win over Rafael dos Anjos, but then he drops a decision a couple fights later to Evan Dunham. He's not a very consistent fighter. He is dangerous, has some power, but doesn't really throw a high enough volume to make the best use of that, and does have a good guillotine choke. Strong on the ground. Healy, he's a real grinder, likes to get guys to the ground, wants to fight in phone booth range, make it a brawl like he did against Jim Miller. Tibau, with his physique and his stature, I think he might be able to get on the inside of Healy pretty easily and crack him, land a big punch. Tibau, though, against Jamie Varner, he's very dominant in the first two rounds, and then Varner was able to take him down in that third round and really won that third round pretty dominantly. So Tibau, I think, is subject to fade late, and Healy does have cardio. He's going to be pushing the pace and in the fight the whole time. But Healy being on a 3-fight losing streak, getting dominated pretty badly in all of those fights. I don't really trust him to win this fight. Tibau, although he's been inconsistent, I think he's going to be a bad matchup for Healy, even if this is an easier opponent for Healy, but Healy will have the higher work rate, but Tibau, I think, is going to land that big punch at some point. I also think he might be able to dominate him with the wrestling, but I'm going to take Tibau, but a tough fight to call. Should be a good scrap. Moving on to the Fox Sports 1 main card at featherweight, Lucas Martins taking on Alex White. This is one of the best fights on the card. Actually, for me, the second best fight after the main event. Really good matchmaking here. Lucas Martins has had a couple of fights in the UFC. Got knocked out in his debut against Edson Barboza. Since then, against Jeremy Larson, it was a real brawl against Larson, who I think is a tough veteran who didn't do anything on the show. I think Larson's a pretty limited fighter, and he was able to make a real brawl out of that fight, a pretty even brawl against Martins, and Martins was eventually able to knock him out in the third round. But before he got the knockout, that fight was pretty even. And then against Junior Hernandez, dropped down to bantamweight and was able to hurt Hernandez early, dropped him and jumped on that rear naked choke and put him out very quickly in the first round. Alex White, though, coming off of his debut win, a very impressive knockout over Esteban Payan. Alex White has a boxing background, I believe, and against Payan, I thought he looked very good. Payan not being a very good fighter, in my opinion, from what we've seen of him in the UFC, pretty low-level guy, but Esteban Payan was the one coming forward and attacking in that fight. Alex White seemed to throw nothing. I don't think he threw any strikes before he knocked him out. But Esteban Payan was pushing the pace, and the first time that Alex White chose to come forward and throw his hands is when he got the knockout. So I was really impressed by that. Seemed to have great timing, great instincts on when to attack and come forward. Really found the opening very well and seemed to have big power putting Payan out. And because Lucas Martins was in a brawl with, I think, a much less skilled striker in Jeremy Larson, and that Larson was able to extend that fight a couple of rounds and really make it an even brawl, I think Alex White might have the advantage on the feet here. We still haven't seen a lot of Lucas Martins. Got put out in the first round by Barboza, beat Hernandez in the first round. I think Martins probably has, I think it's a safe bet that he has the better jiu-jitsu game, better ground game, more well-rounded, but on the feet, I think Alex White looked really special. I think he is a guy to pay attention to. It's just kind of a gut feeling, but I really liked Alex White's last performance, and I'm going to pick Alex White here. I think he might get a knockout again, but I'm taking Alex White. Although I won't be surprised if Martins wins either. He seems pretty talented, but White, I think he's going to do some things in the division. And next up, John Hands of Stone Lineker taking on Alptekin Ozkilic at flyweight. And actually in the Martins fight, this is actually at featherweight. His last win over Hernandez was his bantamweight debut, and now he's back up at featherweight. Kind of interesting, but still taking Alex White there. Just wanted to note that. But John Hands of Stone Lineker versus Alptekin Ozkilic, flyweight fight. I'm taking Lineker here. He's looked very impressive. He's had a couple of first round stoppages. Lost his last fight to Ali Bagotinov, but Bagotinov was not very willing to engage with him on the feet because Lineker is dangerous on the feet. He was on a 4-fight win streak before that. Had 3 straight stoppage wins where I think he was fed pretty low-level guys who didn't really have a chance to compete with him on the feet. Azamat Gashimov, Jose No Chance Maria, and then Phil Harris, who seems like a pretty low-level flyweight. Everyone's pretty much beaten up on that guy. So I think he was fed some low-level guys, but still looked very dominant on the feet. I thought he made some big improvements with his striking between the Jose Maria fight and the Phil Harris fight. Seemed to be just more of a brawler before. Not much technique, and then against Phil Harris, I was very impressed with his combinations and his hand speed. His hands looked extremely light because of how fast he was throwing his hands, and he targeted the body, as I remember, in that fight. The point is, John Lineker, really dangerous on the feet, has great hands. Alptekin Ozkilic, he looked decent in his debut win over Darren, what's that guy's name? The Bone Crusher. Hold on here. Darren, sorry, I want to get his name right. Darren Uenoyama. Sorry, I can't remember his last name there. Got a win over Darren Uenoyama, who's a pretty skilled submission guy, and Ozkilic was able to out-wrestle him and control him on the ground pretty easily. He then lost a decision against Louis Smolka, where Smolka looked great. Ozkilic got beat on the feet in that fight, and he tried to take down Smolka a few times and was able to he almost was successful with his takedown attempts, but Smolka ended up reversing him as he was being taken down and actually landed in mount when Ozkilic tried to take him down. But Ozkilic, primarily a wrestler, I think that's his biggest asset and where he likes to fight. He might be able to take down John Lineker. Ali Bagautinov was able to do it. I don't think Ozkilic is as good a wrestler, but I'm taking Lineker here. I think he's really looking to make a statement after his last loss to Bagautinov. He's on a pretty good streak. Was looking really good. Good hands. I'm taking him to win this fight. I think he finishes Ozkilic at some point. Not that early, but I think Lineker's the safe bet here. And next up, another interesting matchup. Not one I'm particularly excited for, but kind of interesting matchmaking at lightweight. Justin J-Bomb Salas taking on Joe Proctor. Joe Proctor, veteran of Tough 15. And I was pretty impressed with him in the house. I think he trains under Joe Lozon. I think he got a finish to get into the house, and then had a good submission win over Chris Tickle, who was a pretty dangerous striker, and Proctor was able to get, I think it was a standing rear naked choke, which was pretty impressive, and ended up dropping a decision to James Vick, I believe, in the house. And since coming into the UFC, he's had some good performances. Had a real quick knockout over Jeremy Larson in the first round where he looked really good. That was in the Tough 15 finale. Then he lost to Ramsey Nijum, but that was a back and forth fight. Went 3 rounds. Proctor had his moments. I think he actually dropped Nijum early in that fight. And then his last fight against Cristiano Marcelo, never really mounted any significant offense, but outstruck Marcelo on the feet. Was able to escape a heel hook attempt or some kind of leg lock by Marcelo. Was able to escape it and outboxed him on the feet. Targeted the body a lot, but didn't really seem to have a killer instinct like he did in the Larson or even the Nijum fight. But he has solid boxing. I don't think really dangerous with the hands, but solid boxing, and is a very good jiu-jitsu, which again he showed in the house in the Ultimate Fighter. Good jiu-jitsu. Justin Salas, on the other hand, has been pretty good lately. Inconsistent over his entire UFC career. Has been win-loss since coming into the UFC. Has a win over Anton Quivenin. Got ran over by Tim Means. Had a win over Aaron Riley. Again, got ran over by Thiago Tavares. But in his last fight, knocked out Ben Wall and showed that he can be dangerous with his strikes. Although Ben Wall, I think, might be one of those guys that everyone can knock out. And then against Aaron Riley before that, he won a decision there. Justin Salas, he circles around the cage a lot. he throws he kind of throws he picks his strikes, throws one here and there, kind of likes to use angles, doesn't really brawl, he, like I said, he picks his shots. Against Aaron Riley, really, he bounces around on his feet a lot, moves around the cage. There was a shot here and there, gets away from guys before they can hit him back. And against Benoit, though, he's able to get the knockout and look pretty good, more aggressive. Joe Proctor, I think, is just more skilled everywhere, on the ground. On the feet, I think he'll throw a higher volume. Salas might have the bigger power, but I'm taking Joe Proctor here to win the decision. Could be a close fight. Salas, if he chooses to, circle a lot like he did against Aaron Riley, I could see him, using that style of striking to outpoint Proctor. But I'm taking Joe Proctor to win a decision. Next up at welterweight, Rick Story versus Leonardo Mafra. Rick Story was originally supposed to fight John Howard, which I thought was a pretty interesting fight and was going to be pretty competitive. This one definitely not as excited for. But if you don't know who Leonardo Mafra is, he's a veteran from Tough Brazil 1. He lost to Cesar for Mutanche Ferreira in the house in the first round, or in his first fight in the house. So he lost that, and then in the finale, he got finished by Ferreira. And then in the finale, was doing very well against Thiago Perpetuo. Hurt him. Seemed like he was going to win that fight, but then Perpetuo turned the fight around, was able to hurt him with something, and knocked him out pretty quickly. That was actually in the third round that Perpetuo won that fight, but I remember very clearly Mafra was looking really good and really dominated those first two rounds, and as I remember had Perpetuo pretty close to being finished. So he's not a guy I would sleep on. I wouldn't completely count him out, but as we've seen, Perpetuo has not been doing well at all in the UFC. Same thing with Mutanche Ferreira, who's a guy I was super high on, but doesn't seem to be a very high-level fighter, coming off of a pretty disappointing performance, I thought, against Andrew Craig. He won the fight, but really didn't look that good. And if Mafra wasn't able to get past those guys, that might be telling of his abilities. But since that loss to Thiago Perpetuo, which was the Tough Brazil 1 finale, or UFC 147, back in June of 2012, he's on a 5-fight win streak and finished all of those guys in the first or second round. No one I know, all Brazilian guys on the Brazilian circuit, it seems, but been a long time since his last UFC fight, obviously, but his opponent, Rick Story, solid top 15 guy, hasn't really been able to break through that top 10, has always lost the fights against the guys who would get him over that hump. Had a real good streak going in his early UFC career, a 6-fight win streak. The only guy who has a win over Johnny Hendricks. Then lost fights to Brenneman, Martin Kampmann, and against Brock Jardine, a guy who couldn't cut it in the UFC, and I don't believe he's with the company anymore. Rick Story wasn't able to come close to finishing him in that fight, which I think was not very good. He then got submitted by Damian Maia, had a knockout win over Quinn Mulhern, had a real tough decision fight with Pyle, where he almost nearly knocked him out at one point, but that went to a decision, and Mike Pyle won. Pretty razor-thin decision, though. Then his boxing looked really improved against Brian Ebersol. Again, wasn't really able to come close to finishing him. I don't think he ever knocked Ebersol down, which was a bit concerning. Ebersol had nothing for him on the feet there. And then against Kelvin Gastelum, I thought he was going to get finished in that fight, but actually made a really tough fight out of it and looked pretty good. I thought one of his better performances in the last few years. He got knocked down with a high kick at one point, but I actually thought that Rick Story won that fight and kind of got robbed against Gastelum. It was a close fight, but I think Story's slowly getting better, slowly getting out of that hump of being an inconsistent win-loss fighter. Leonardo Mafra, this should be Story's fight to lose. He obviously has a ton of experience at a very high level in the UFC for a very long time. He should be able to win this fight. I just wouldn't completely count out Mafra because, again, I thought he looked very good and aggressive against Thiago Perpetuo a couple of years back. But I'm going with Story here. Hopefully it gets a finish, but I wouldn't count on it. I think he wins a tough decision. Next up, the co-main event, fight that I just don't like this matchup. I think both these guys could be matched up with. I think both these guys could have fights that make more sense for them, different opponents. But Edson Barboza taking on Evan Dunham in a lightweight fight doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But Edson Barboza, I think, has been pretty overrated for a long time. Not to say he's not skilled or isn't a good fighter, but I think a lot of people view this guy as a top contender. But early on in his UFC career, he won a couple of decisions that I thought should have gone the other way. I'm talking about Anthony Njokuani and Ross Pearson. I thought the Ross Pearson fight he more clearly lost, and then Njokuani I thought was razor thin, could have gone either way. Had that really great highlight knockout spinning wheel kick of Terry Edom. Then got ran over by Jamie Varner in Jamie Varner's return to the UFC. Since then, he was on a 3-fight win streak. Had a knockout over Lucas Martins. Looked really good in that fight. Destroyed Rafael Oliveira, who is just a bad fighter in the UFC. And Danny Castillo, where Castillo got robbed out of a draw. Castillo knocked him down in that first round, nearly knocked him out, had him in a rear naked choke, and completely dominated him in that first round, easily a 10-8. Barboza survived and was able to win the rest of the fight with leg kicks, but he just hasn't had that win over a top guy. And even against Castillo, after Castillo was extremely gassed, really couldn't do much to him other than leg kick him. His finishes have been over guys who, in Rafael Oliveira, I think was really just fed to him the same way he was fed to Eric Koch. And then against Lucas Martins, a guy who's unproven, has shown some promise, but I think Barboza, just overrated. And then, of course, in his last fight against Donald Cerrone, he looked very good. Probably the best he's looked against a top guy, and obviously the best guy he's fought in his UFC career. Was looking very dominant and strong in that first round, really lighting up Cerrone on the feet before just getting caught with a really short punch, basically a jab from Cerrone that knocked him down, and Cerrone subbed him. I think he's got a weak chin. Varner was able to put him out. Castillo nearly knocked him out, and Donald Cerrone obviously dropped him with a really short punch. And especially Danny Castillo, who is a powerful guy but not a technical striker. And Barboza is a technical striker, but I think that's that's a hole in his game, that Varner and Castillo, guys who aren't technical at all, but just brawlers are able to just blitz him in that first round and hurt him. Evan Dunham, though, does not have knockout power. Hasn't finished anyone since Nick Lentz back in 2012. Dunham, after having a great start to his UFC career, has been pretty inconsistent since. I don't think he's been the same guy since his loss to Melvin Guillard when he got finished. I think that was really the last we saw of the prospect that was Evan Dunham. Finished Nick Lentz. That was a good win. Had a real great brawl, which I thought was one of the most exciting fights I've ever seen against TJ Grant, which actually could have gone Evan Dunham's way. That, if you guys haven't seen that, you should definitely check that fight out. Real great brawl that doesn't get mentioned a lot, but he could have won that fight against TJ Grant. He then won a decision against Gleison Tibau pretty clearly, where he was able to keep Tibau at bay, and then dropped fights to Rafael dos Anjos, although that fight also really could have gone his way. Super close, razor-thin fight. And then got ran over by Donald Cerrone in his last fight. Tried to make it a brawl against Cerrone, but didn't work out for Dunham. He ended up getting hurt on the feet and then submitted on the ground with a triangle choke. So Dunham just never really blows your socks off. Hasn't had that big win over a top guy, although again he never really gets dominated except for his last fight against Cerrone. But just kind of seems like he's become a brawler. Used to be a guy who had a really technical and dangerous grappling game. He submitted Efren Escudero and took Tyson Griffin's back for the whole fight there, and really that we haven't seen that ground game since, and just seems like he's always kind of stuck in one gear and can't really change the pace during his fights. Again, he had real close fights with Rafael dos Anjos and TJ Grant, but I don't see him getting this win. I think he can make it a brawl. And honestly, I think Barboza, I think he's going to finish him early, first or second round. I just think Barboza is going to be way faster on the feet. Dunham is tough, but Cerrone was able to hurt him. And we saw in that last fight that Barboza early on was really able to light up Cerrone before getting caught. And Dunham's not the kind of guy who's proven that he can put people out with one punch or come back from a severe beating. So I'm taking Barboza. I think he really dominates with the striking. Obviously has the way more versatile and unorthodox striking. I think he gets it done here. I think it's his fight to lose. Dunham a tough guy, but I don't think he can get it done against Barboza. Now the main event, the only fight on this card that really is significant, but a very interesting matchup, and a fight that I'm really looking forward to, and it's going to have big implications. The winner of this is an instant contender, a lightweight. Both these guys are top 10 already and have been for a long time. And both guys have kind of had similar career paths. Both of them were top contenders for a while in the UFC and then suffered some setbacks, and have both been trying to rebuild and get back to the top, and have kind of been going along at the same rate for a while. Jim Miller, he had like a 6 or 7 fight win streak early on in his UFC career. 7 fight win streak, and I thought he was a top contender. behind Gray Maynard and Frankie Edgar. This guy was the number 3 guy in the division. I really thought that. And he's a submission expert, very, very high-level submission fighter in the UFC. The guy submitted Charles Oliveira, and Oliveira is, I think, one of the very best submission guys in the UFC right now, coming off of an incredible submission win over Hatsuhioki. But Miller always had solid, decent striking, not really something he went to a lot, but had a real dominant knockout over Kamal Shalarus. And then he suffered those losses to Benson Henderson and Nate Diaz, the win over Gillard in the middle. And since then, had a win over Joe Lozon. And then the Pat Healy fight, I thought that was going to be the beginning of the end for Jim Miller. I thought that was going to be the beginning of the end for him because that was the first guy who wasn't an established contender that he had lost to. His only losses before that were to Edgar Maynard, Ben Henderson, and Nate Diaz. 3 of those guys being former champions. 2 of them being former champions, and obviously Maynard and Diaz fighting for the title. But Pat Healy put him out. I think that's kind of a fluke win, though. I think Miller would beat him today. And then had some great wins in his last couple of fights. First round finishes over Fabrizio Camoys, who's a very highly regarded jiu-jitsu black belt. And Jim Miller was not afraid at all to engage him on the ground and was able to get him in an armbar off of his back and submitted him. Very impressive. Although in that fight, Camoys was really able to light up Miller on the feet for the little time they spent there on the feet, and I thought that was pretty. Concerning. Camoys, being a jiu-jitsu guy, was really able to get to Miller on the feet there early. But then against Yancy Medeiros, who is a talented, dangerous striker, Jim Miller went right after him, hurt him with a body shot, and jumped on that guillotine choke in the first round early, and looked very impressive. Great submissions, solid striking, and I think his striking's getting a little better. Although, like I said, against Camoys, not a good striker, was in a little trouble on the feet, and then against Medeiros looked great. But Cerrone, always an exciting fighter. He's been really good since coming in the UFC. Although I thought he had a little bit of a streak there where he was mentally checked out, really gone mentally. His fights with KJ Nunes and Rafael dos Anjos just looked like a completely different fighter, just a shell of himself. Wasn't really aggressive, just didn't look like the same fighter. Lost that fight to Dos Anjos, but has responded in a big way. And I think he's really put that time behind him. Ran over Evan Dunham, looked very dominant, got a really impressive triangle choke in that fight. Against Adriano Martins, that was a pretty even fight. Cerrone wasn't losing it on the feet, but it was pretty even, and was able to connect with a head kick in the first round, late in the first round, and knocked Martins out cold. And then against Barboza, was really getting lit up early. Barboza was just way too fast for him, but Cerrone was able to land that short punch that put Barboza down and jumped on a rear naked choke. Cerrone will have the advantage striking. Jim Miller against Nate Diaz, he was never able to get on the inside, being the shorter guy. And Cerrone, he's had several knockout wins. Has hurt guys a lot with his striking. I mean, he knocked out Melvin Gillard, very rare thing. I think he may be the only guy to have a knockout over Melvin Gillard. But Cerrone will have the striking advantage. Muay Thai style striker. He'll have the advantage there, and he may be able to hurt Miller if it goes deep. If it goes, I think, past into the third and past the third round, I don't think Miller will be able to hang on the feet with him. Miller's going to look to get this to the ground. Cerrone, also, I didn't mention, a very strong submission fighter himself. Has had a lot of great submission wins, particularly the triangle choke. It's kind of his go-to submission, and the rear naked choke as well. Miller, though, will attack from all positions, will go for real wild stuff. He goes for flying arm triangle chokes. Did that against Benson Henderson, where he actually pulled guard on the feet and hung on to the front of Henderson's torso while he had the arm triangle choke in place. I think that Miller's only chance to win this is early in the first round. I think he needs to blitz Cerrone. I think that's when Cerrone's most vulnerable, like we saw against Barboza. He's not a particularly fast starter. He was against Dunham and Martins. And I want to say Miller, he's 5'8", and let's see Cerrone's height. Cerrone's 5'11", so a bit of a height advantage. I think Miller might look to target that body, being the shorter guy, and being the guy who likes to strike on the inside more. Hurt Medeiros in his last fight, hurt him in the body, and I think he might target the body of Cerrone early, but Miller has to, he's definitely got to look to finish this early and blitz Cerrone early. I don't see Miller winning a decision. I think Cerrone's striking is just too good for that. Against Jeremy Stevens, Donald Cerrone was able to really shut down any of Stevens' power and striking in that fight, and really showed great range striking. And I think he can do that same thing to Jim Miller. Miller can't strike at distance with him. Cerrone, though, I think his last couple of wins, he's won them because he can kind of pull something out of nowhere, be the more dangerous guy. He has that one-punch knockout power that he's shown against Martins and Barboza. I don't see... Miller hasn't... Cerrone, he hasn't won many decisions, if at all. I think the last decision he won was against Wagner Hocha, where he didn't look good in that fight. Cerrone didn't come close to finishing that fight at any point. Another one of his kind of lackluster fights, but that was like 3 years ago. So Cerrone, I don't think he doesn't really put together 3 rounds, or in this case 5 rounds of dominant fighting. And especially his last couple of fights shown that he can really be pushed and tested in that first round, and has really had to rely on his finishing power more so than being a dominant fighter. Whereas Jim Miller, he has been able to hang with guys longer, also gets those finishes early, but real tough fight to Jim Miller, I think, is less prone to, having some mental things going on. I think if someone's going to be, mentally out of it, I think Cerrone's a bit more of a head case than Jim Miller. But I think I got to go with Cerrone. I just don't think Miller's striking is on his level. But Miller's really dangerous early in that first round. And like I said, I think if he blitzes Cerrone, hurts him, can jump on a submission real early in that first round, I think that's his best opportunity to win. But I've got to go with Cerrone. I think he outstrikes Miller for a couple rounds and hurts him third or fourth round. Possibly finishes him there. But very excited for this fight, and very important fight. Winner should be right there in the title talk. All right, guys, those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night 45, Cerrone versus Miller. Wow, 50 minutes. Sorry about that. My videos never go this long. I don't know why this one took so long, but check out my predictions for UFC Fight Night 46, McGregor versus Brandao. I'll have recaps for both of these, and I'll be back next week with my predictions for UFC on Fox 12, I think it is. Alright, guys, thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye.